Today I'm going to tell you a story about a woman whose only chance of survival in the brutal desert was to trust the very man she was taught was a savage. But this alliance for survival would quickly turn into a forbidden love that put them both in even greater danger. It's a powerful story of trust and love against all odds, so let's see if we can get 100 likes on this video. The Arizona sun beat down upon the stagecoach, a solitary vessel navigating an ocean of dust and rock. Inside, the air was thick with heat and the smell of worn leather. Abigail Thorne clutched the handle of her medical bag, her knuckles white. Opposite her, her father, Dr. Alistair Thorne, stared out at the shimmering landscape, his face a mask of weary resolve. They were traveling to a new life, a new practice, but the journey felt more like an escape. The rhythmic creak of the wheels and the steady plod of the horses were the only sounds in the vast emptiness. Suddenly, the peace was shattered. A sharp crack echoed through the canyon, followed by another. Wood splintered from the coach door, inches from Abigail's head. "Get down!" Her father yelled, his voice rough as he reached for the old revolver tucked in his coat. The stagecoach lurched violently as the driver fought to control the panicked horses. Through the window, Abigail saw them, riders emerging from the rock formations like specters of dust and violence. Their faces were obscured by bandanas, but their intent was clear. These were not common highwaymen. They moved with a chilling purpose, their rifles aimed not at the strongbox, but at the passengers. The guard on top of the coach returned fire, his shotgun barking a defiant roar. One of the attackers tumbled from his saddle. But the odds were impossible. Another volley of shots erupted. The guard fell silent. The driver slumped over the reins, and the coach careened off the trail, crashing to a halt against a cluster of boulders with a groan of splintering wood. Abigail's heart hammered against her ribs. She saw a man with cruel eyes and a triumphant sneer ride forward. Caleb Vance, the man her father was meant to testify against. "Stay behind me, Abigail," Dr. Thorne commanded, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hand. He leveled his revolver through the shattered window, firing at the approaching figures. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. One of Vance's men cried out and clutched his arm, but the rest kept coming, circling the crippled coach like buzzards. They were exposed, trapped. A bullet tore through the thin wall of the coach, striking Dr. Thorne in the shoulder. He gasped, the revolver falling from his grasp. "Father!" Abigail cried, rushing to his side. The wound was bad, bleeding freely through his tweed coat. She pressed a hand to it, her medical training taking over, even as terror threatened to paralyze her. Outside, Vance laughed, a harsh, grating sound that scraped against the silence of the desert. He dismounted slowly, savoring his victory. "Well, well, doctor," Vance called out, his voice dripping with malice. "It seems your journey has come to an unfortunate end. Should have stayed back east where you belong." He gestured to two of his men. "Get him out here. We need to make sure the good doctor cannot speak to anyone, ever again." Abigail looked at her father's pale face, at the blood soaking his shirt, and a cold dread washed over her. This was it. There was no escape. She shielded her father with her own body, her gaze fixed on the approaching outlaws. The sun was a merciless eye in the sky, a silent witness to their impending doom. The desert offered no sanctuary, no hope. Just heat, rock, and the promise of a shallow, unmarked grave. The men reached the coach door, their grimy hands reaching inside. Just as the outlaws' hands grabbed the coach door, a rifle shot rang out from the canyon rim. It was a different sound from the others, sharper, more precise. One of Vance's men crumpled to the ground without a sound. Everyone froze, their heads snapping up towards the rocks. There was nothing there but shadow and stone. "Who was that?" one of the men growled, raising his weapon. Vance scanned the ridge, his confident smirk replaced by a scowl of pure fury. "Find him! He is just one man!" he bellowed. Another shot answered him. A second bandit fell, clutching his chest. Panic began to ripple through the remaining outlaws. They were the hunters, but suddenly, they had become the prey. They fired wildly at the rocks, their bullets whining and ricocheting in the oppressive silence. A figure moved among the rocks, a phantom of silent grace and deadly purpose. He was an Apache warrior, his movements fluid and economical. His name was Hoka. For 2 days he had tracked Caleb Vance and his gang. They had raided his people's camp, not for supplies but for the sheer cruelty of it. They had taken horses, but they had also taken lives. Hoka was not here for justice. He was here for retribution. He raised his rifle, its stock worn smooth by his hands. He did not waste shots. Each pull of the trigger was deliberate, a sentence passed and executed in a single moment. The bandits, so accustomed to being the purveyors of fear, were now consumed by it. They could not see their attacker, but they could feel his presence, a cold specter of death haunting the canyon. Hoka moved along the ridge, his moccasins making no sound on the stone. He saw the terror in the bandits' eyes and felt a grim satisfaction. He was an avenging spirit of this land, a land they had desecrated. He fired again, and another man went down. The outlaws were now in a full-blown panic, firing blindly and seeking cover that was not there. In the chaos, a stray bullet from one of the bandits grazed Hoka's side, a searing line of fire. He grunted, pressing a hand to the injury, but his focus never wavered. He had a mission to complete. He saw Vance, the leader, shouting orders that his men no longer heard. They were broken, their bravado shattered by an unseen enemy. Caleb Vance was no fool. He recognized a lost fight. "To the horses!" he screamed, abandoning any thought of finishing off the doctor. He scrambled onto his mount, firing a few parting shots toward the ridge before digging his heels into the horses' flanks. The few remaining members of his gang followed suit, fleeing into the labyrinth of canyons as fast as their horses could carry them. They left behind the dead and the dying, a testament to their failed attack. Hoka watched them go, his dark eyes cold. He did not pursue. His revenge was not yet complete, but for now, the immediate threat was gone. He slowly rose from his cover, the pain in his side a dull, steady throb. Below, in the oppressive silence, the survivors in the stagecoach were left to deal with the aftermath. The silence that descended after the outlaws fled was more deafening than the gunfire. Abigail stared out at the still forms scattered in the dust, her mind struggling to process the sudden, violent shift in their fate. Her father's pained groan brought her back to the present. "Abigail, the bag," he rasped. She moved with purpose, her shock giving way to the familiar discipline of her training. She retrieved her medical bag and quickly went to work, cleaning her father's wound as best she could with carbolic acid and applying a clean dressing. The bullet had gone clean through, a small mercy in this hellish landscape. He would live if she could prevent infection. As she worked, she was acutely aware of another presence, the warrior. He had descended from the rocks and stood near the coach, watching them with an unreadable expression, one hand pressed firmly against his side. Once she had stabilized her father, Abigail took a deep breath and stood. She looked at the Apache warrior. He was tall and lean, his body etched with the hard lines of a life lived in this unforgiving land. His face was stern, but his eyes held a depth of intelligence, not the vacant cruelty she had seen in Vance's men. Dark red stained the deerskin tunic at his side. He had been injured in the fight. He had saved their lives. Taking a small canteen and a roll of linen bandages from her bag, she walked towards him. He did not move, his gaze tracking her every step. He was wary, a predator assessing a potential threat. "You are hurt," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "Please, let me help you. It is the least I can do." Hoka watched her approach, his hand instinctively tightening on the handle of the knife at his belt. He had learned long ago that trust was a luxury, and compassion from her people was rarer still. Yet there was no fear in her eyes, only a sincere concern. He saw the skill with which she had tended to her father. He looked down at the wound in his side. It was not deep, but it needed to be cleaned. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Abigail knelt beside him, her movements calm and efficient. As she cleaned the wound, she could feel the tension in his body. She worked silently, aware of the immense cultural chasm that separated them, yet in this moment they were simply two people, brought together by violence, tending to the wounds it had inflicted. The harsh desert sun seemed a little less menacing. "They will return," Hoka said, his voice a low rumble. It was the first time he had spoken to her. His English was clear, accented but precise. "Vance is not a man who forgets. He will hunt you." Abigail finished tying the bandage. "I know," she replied, her gaze meeting his. "And he will hunt you as well." A silent understanding passed between them. They were allies, bound by a common enemy. "My name is Hoka," he said. "They attacked my people. That is why I followed them." He explained that his quest was one of vengeance. "I am Abigail Thorne. This is my father, Dr. Alistair Thorne." She looked over at the coach where her father was now resting fitfully. "We must find a safe place. He is not well enough to travel far." A fragile truce had been forged in blood and dust. By late afternoon, Dr. Thorne's condition had worsened. A fever had taken hold, and he tossed and turned in a state of delirium, muttering names from a life Abigail had never known. The heat was relentless, and their water supply was dangerously low. To remain by the wrecked stagecoach was a death sentence. Vance could return, or the desert itself would claim them. "I know a place," Hoka said, breaking the silence. "A canyon with a hidden spring. It is safe, but the journey will be hard." Abigail looked at her father's feverish face, then back at Hoka's steady gaze. She saw no deception there, only a quiet strength that she found herself desperately wanting to trust. "We have no choice," she said, her voice firm. "Lead the way." The journey was an ordeal. Hoka managed to salvage one of the stagecoach horses that had not bolted. He gently lifted the semi-conscious doctor onto its back. Hoka himself walked, refusing any offer of rest, his stride even, and tireless despite his own injury. Abigail walked beside her father, steadying him, whispering words of encouragement that he could not hear. Hoka led them away from the trail, into a maze of rock and sand. He moved with an innate understanding of the land, choosing paths that would be invisible to anyone following them. He would pause, scanning their back trail, his eyes missing nothing. He was a guardian, a silent protector navigating them through his world, a world that was both beautiful and deadly. Abigail marveled at his resilience. He seemed to draw strength from the very earth he walked upon. He showed her how to find moisture in the roots of a desert plant and how to read the signs of the animals. For him, this harsh landscape was not an enemy, but a provider, a home. As they traveled, a silent rapport grew between them. It was not built on words, but on shared hardship and mutual reliance. She saw the careful way he adjusted her father's position on the horse to make him more comfortable. He saw the unwavering determination in her eyes as she fought exhaustion to care for her father. They were from different worlds, yet here, stripped of everything, they found a common humanity. As dusk painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, they arrived at a narrow opening in a sheer rock face, almost completely concealed by overgrown brush. Hoka pushed aside the branches, revealing a dark passage. "The canyon is through here," he said. Inside, the air was immediately cooler. The passage opened into a secluded, verdant canyon, a secret paradise hidden in the heart of the desert. A small, clear spring bubbled up from the rocks, feeding a pool of crystal water surrounded by ferns and cottonwood trees. It was a place of peace, of healing. For the first time since the attack, Abigail felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps here, in this hidden sanctuary, they might just survive. The hidden canyon became their world. The clean water and cool air worked their magic. And under Abigail's constant care, Dr. Thorne's fever finally broke. He remained weak, but the delirium passed, and he began the slow process of recovery. During the long days of her father's convalescence, a quiet routine formed between Abigail and Hoka. She would tend to his wound, which was healing cleanly, and he would provide for them. He would disappear for hours and return with small game or edible roots, his knowledge of the canyon's resources seemingly endless. He taught her which plants were medicinal and which were poisonous, his voice a low, patient murmur as he explained the properties of each. In the evenings, they would sit by a small, smokeless fire, the canyon walls enclosing them in an intimate world of their own. The barriers between them began to crumble, not through grand declarations, but through the sharing of small truths. Hoka spoke of his life, not of battles, but of the seasons, of the stories passed down by his elders, of the sacredness of the land. He spoke of the stars as if they were old friends, mapping out the constellations and telling her their names in his language. He described a world guided by spirits and the rhythms of nature, a world so different from her own, yet one that resonated with a deep and profound logic. Abigail, in turn, shared her own stories. She told him of the bustling city she had left behind, of its towering buildings that blocked out the sky, of the endless noise and the sea of unfamiliar faces. She spoke of her dream to follow in her father's footsteps, to become a doctor in a world where women were expected only to be wives and mothers. She spoke of the loneliness she had felt even when surrounded by thousands of people. Hoka listened intently, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. He did not judge her world. He simply sought to understand it. "You have a strong spirit," he said one night, his words simple but carrying immense weight. "Like the eagle that flies highest to see the whole world." Abigail found herself watching him more and more. She watched the way he moved, with a quiet confidence that was part of his very being. She noticed the kindness in his eyes when he looked at her recovering father. A feeling she had long suppressed, a feeling she thought had died with her youthful dreams, began to stir within her. It was a dangerous, impossible feeling, born in the crucible of violence and nurtured in the quiet intimacy of their sanctuary. She would catch his gaze across the fire, and in that shared look, she would feel a connection that transcended words, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that was growing between them, as wild and undeniable as the canyon itself. Their peaceful interlude was shattered by the arrival of a lone rider. He was an Apache scout, a friend of Hoka's. He appeared at the canyon entrance as silently as a ghost, leading his horse through the narrow passage. He and Hoka spoke for a long time in their own language, their faces grim. When Hoka returned to the fireside where Abigail was preparing a simple meal, his expression was grave. "What is it?" she asked, her heart sinking. "What has happened?" Hoka stared into the flames for a moment before speaking. "The scout comes from the town of Redemption. Caleb Vance is there." Hoka explained the news. Vance had not only survived, but he had woven a tapestry of lies. He had ridden into Redemption, claiming his party was attacked by a band of savage heathens. He said they had murdered everyone, including a doctor and his daughter, and made off with a shipment of gold that had never existed. The town was in an uproar. Worse, Vance had described a lone warrior who had supposedly led the attack, a warrior who matched Hoka's description perfectly. "He has put a price on my head," Hoka said, his voice hard as flint. "A reward for my capture, dead or alive. Now I am hunted not only by his men, but by every bounty hunter and greedy fool in this territory." A cold fear gripped Abigail. The sanctuary of the canyon now felt like a cage. They were trapped. Sooner or later, someone would find them. "We cannot stay here," she said, her mind racing. "But my father is still too weak to travel far." Hoka nodded, his jaw tight. "To run is to admit guilt, and Vance will not stop hunting you either. As long as you live, you are a witness who can undo his lies." He stood up, his decision made. "I must go to Redemption. I must face him. It is the only way to end this. I will find proof of his lies and expose him for what he is." "You cannot go alone," Abigail protested, standing to face him. "They will shoot you on sight. It is a suicide mission." Hoka's expression did not change. "It is a risk I must take. For my people, and now, for you and your father." In his eyes, she saw not recklessness, but a profound sense of duty. He was a warrior, and this was his battle. But she could not let him face it by himself. Their fates were intertwined now. "Then I am going with you," she declared, her voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even herself. "They are not looking for a woman. I can enter the town, listen and learn. I can be your eyes and ears. We will do this together." They left Dr. Thorne hidden safely in the canyon with enough food and water for several days, his revolver close at hand. Hoka led Abigail through a series of game trails to a ridge overlooking the town of Redemption. It was a dusty collection of wooden buildings huddled under the vast, empty sky. From a distance, it looked peaceful, but they both knew it was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Abigail changed out of her torn and trail-worn dress into a simple, sturdy traveling skirt and blouse she had managed to save from the stagecoach. With her hair tied back, she looked like any other woman journeying through the territory. "Be careful," Hoka said, his hand briefly touching her arm. "People here trust rumor more than truth." Abigail walked into Redemption, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm. The town was buzzing with talk of the Apache attack. Posters offering a reward for Hoka were nailed to posts, his face crudely drawn but recognizable. In the saloon, the air was thick with smoke and boastful talk. She saw several of Vance's men drinking at a table, loudly recounting their fabricated tale of heroism. They spoke of the savage they had fought off, their voices filled with false bravado. Abigail sat at a corner table nursing a glass of water, listening to the conversations around her. The prejudice was a palpable thing, a poison that had already condemned Hoka in the minds of these people. Her attention was drawn to a man sitting alone at the bar. He wore a tarnished star on his vest. He had a weary face and observant eyes that seemed to miss nothing. This had to be the marshal. Gathering her courage, Abigail approached him. "Marshal," she asked tentatively. "My name is Elias Croft," he replied, his voice tired. "What can I do for you, ma'am?" She introduced herself as a traveler whose coach had broken down, and cautiously began to ask about the recent attack. Marshal Croft listened, his gaze shrewd. "Something about Vance's story does not sit right with me," he admitted in a low voice. "Too neat. And Vance is a man who attracts trouble." While Abigail was speaking with the marshal, Hoka, who had moved closer to the edge of town under the cover of darkness, was spotted. A sharp-eyed bounty hunter, eager for the reward, raised the alarm. "It is him! The Apache!" A shout went up, and suddenly the town erupted into a frenzy. Men poured out of the saloon, weapons in hand. Hoka melted back into the shadows, the hunters in hot pursuit. He moved swiftly and silently, leading them away from the town, away from Abigail. The chase was on. Back in the saloon, Abigail heard the commotion. Her blood ran cold. The trap had been sprung, and now the hunter she had come to admire, the man she was beginning to love, was running for his life. Hoka ran, not with fear, but with strategic purpose. He was a fox leading the hounds on a merry chase, drawing them further into his territory, further away from the town and closer to the hidden canyon. The bounty hunters and Vance's men, blinded by greed and bloodlust, followed recklessly. They crashed through the underbrush, making enough noise to wake the dead, their shouts echoing in the night. Hoka, by contrast, was a whisper in the darkness, a fleeting shadow that they could never quite corner. He knew this land, every rock, every ravine. It was an extension of himself, and tonight it would be his greatest weapon. He led them on a winding path, tiring them out, frustrating them, making them careless. He reached the entrance to the hidden canyon well ahead of his pursuers. Inside, Abigail and her father were ready. She had made it back shortly after the chase began, her heart in her throat the entire time. Now adrenaline sharpened her senses. Dr. Thorne, though still weak, sat propped against a rock, his old army experience rekindling in his eyes. He held his revolver with a steady hand. "They will come through the passage," Hoka said calmly, checking his rifle. "They will be concentrated. We must make every shot count." There was no fear in his voice, only the focused intensity of a warrior preparing for battle. Abigail took up her position, a second rifle at her side, her role to reload for Hoka and her father. The first of the pursuers stormed into the narrow passage, confident they had their prey trapped. They were met with a disciplined volley of fire. The canyon amplified the sound of the shots, making it seem as if they were facing a much larger force. The lead man fell, and the one behind him staggered back, confusion and pain on his face. From their protected positions, Hoka and Dr. Thorne fired with deadly accuracy. Abigail worked frantically, her hands a blur as she reloaded the warm rifles, the smell of gunpowder filling their small alcove. The hunters, caught in the bottleneck of the passage, were thrown into disarray. The easy money they had dreamed of was turning into a nightmare. The battle raged. The attackers tried to press forward, then fell back, leaving their wounded and dead in the passage. Hoka moved from one vantage point to another, a phantom marksman who seemed to be everywhere at once. His knowledge of the canyon allowed him to fire from unexpected angles, keeping the enemy off balance. Dr. Thorne, despite his injury, was a formidable marksman, his shots precise and economical. Abigail felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. Fear was a luxury she could not afford. Here, in this hidden place, fighting alongside this Apache warrior and her father, she was no longer just a doctor's daughter. She was a survivor, a fighter. Caleb Vance was not with the main group of attackers. He was cunning, a snake who preferred to strike from the shadows. While his men and the bounty hunters made their frontal assault, he had circled around, searching for another way into the canyon. He found a difficult, treacherous climb up the rock face, one that Hoka had not expected anyone to attempt in the dark. Driven by a cold rage, Vance clawed his way to the top. From his new perch, he could see down into the heart of the canyon. He saw Hoka moving between positions, and he saw the alcove where Abigail and her father were hidden. A cruel smile twisted his lips. He raised his rifle, taking careful aim not at the warrior, but at Abigail. She was the witness. With her gone, his story would be unshakable. Below, Dr. Thorne happened to glance up. He saw the faint glint of moonlight on a rifle barrel high above them. He saw the figure silhouetted against the night sky. He saw where the rifle was aimed. There was no time to shout a warning, no time to aim and fire. There was only time for one final act of a father's love. With a strength born of desperation, he shoved Abigail hard, pushing her to the ground behind the cover of a large boulder. The rifle cracked from the cliff above. Dr. Thorne gasped and collapsed, the force of the impact throwing him back against the rock wall. The sound of the shot, so close, so different from the others, alerted Hoka. He saw Vance's position instantly. At the same moment, Abigail scrambled back to her father's side. "Father, no!" she cried, seeing the dark stains spreading across his chest. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a fierce protective love. "Live, Abigail," he whispered, his voice a faint breath. "Live." Then his eyes closed. A wave of anguish washed over Abigail, so powerful it threatened to drown her. But it was followed by a cold, hard fury. Vance, seeing the doctor fall, believed his task was complete. He took aim again, searching for the girl. That moment of distraction was all Hoka needed. He raised his rifle, the world narrowing to the man on the cliff. There was no hatred in him, only a cold, quiet finality. He fired. Vance jerked backward, his rifle clattering against the rocks as he tumbled from his perch, his scream cut short by the impact far below. With their leader gone, the fight drained out of the remaining attackers. They retreated, melting back into the night, leaving their dead behind. Silence fell upon the canyon once more, a heavy, mournful silence, broken only by Abigail's heartbroken sobs. The first light of dawn was filtering into the canyon when Marshal Elias Croft and a small posse of deputies arrived. Drawn by the sound of the sustained gunfire, the marshal had finally acted on his suspicions. He entered the narrow passage cautiously, his weapon drawn. What he found was not a scene of a savage massacre, but the aftermath of a desperate siege. He saw the bodies of known outlaws and bounty hunters. He saw the dead form of Caleb Vance at the bottom of the cliff. And he saw a grieving young woman holding her dead father, with a grim-faced Apache warrior standing guard over them. The truth of the situation was laid bare, written in gunpowder and sorrow. Abigail, her voice hoarse with grief, told the marshal everything. She told him of the ambush, of Vance's true motives, of her father's intended testimony. Hoka stood by silently, allowing her to speak. His presence was a testament to the truth of her words. Marshal Croft listened without interruption, his weary face growing harder with each detail. He looked at the evidence around him, at the quiet dignity of the warrior and the raw grief of the young woman. He had been a lawman for a long time, and he knew truth when he saw it. "There will be no more bounty," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "As far as the law is concerned, Hoka is a free man." The marshal and his men helped them. They gathered the bodies of the outlaws to be taken back to redemption. But Dr. Thorne would not be buried in the town's dusty cemetery. At Abigail's request, they found a peaceful spot at the mouth of the canyon, beneath a tall cottonwood tree. They buried him there, in the land that had claimed his life but had also shown his daughter a new path. After the simple burial, Marshall Croft offered Abigail a ride back to town, a way back to the world she had known. She looked at the dusty street that would lead back east, and she felt nothing. That world was gone. Her father was gone. Everything she had been was buried with him. She turned and looked at Hoka. He stood waiting, his horse patient beside him. He did not ask her to stay, nor did he ask her to go. He simply watched her, his eyes holding a question and a promise. In his gaze, she saw not the end of her world, but the beginning of a new one. A world of hardship and uncertainty, yes, but also one of honesty, courage, and a love she was only just beginning to understand. She walked over to the marshal. "Thank you for your kindness, Marshal Croft," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But I am not going back." She then walked to Hoka, and without a word, allowed him to help her onto the spare horse. As the sun rose higher, two riders headed west, away from the towns and the so-called civilization, leaving the echoes of the canyon behind them. 5 years passed. The harsh sun and sweeping winds of the territory had sculpted a new life for them, one far from the reach of bounties and prejudice. In a hidden valley, nestled between protective mesas, they built a home. It was not a cabin, nor was it a traditional wickiup. It was a fusion of both. A sturdy structure of wood and stone built into the side of the cliff, insulated with adobe and hides. It was a symbol of their life together, two different worlds joined to create something new and strong. The valley was their sanctuary, watered by a stream that flowed from the mountains, its banks green with willows and grass for their small herd of horses. Abigail's medical bag was never far from her side. Her reputation had spread through the quiet channels of the land. The Apache, and even some Navajo who traded with them, knew of the woman with the healing hands who lived with Hoka. They called her She Who Mends, a name spoken with respect. She combined her father's scientific knowledge with the herbal lore Hoka taught her, creating effective remedies from the plants that grew in their valley. She found a profound sense of purpose in her work, a continuation of her father's legacy, reshaped by her new life. She healed the people of this land, and in doing so, she continued to heal herself. Their home was filled with the sounds of a life being fully lived. Laughter echoed in the valley now. They had a son, a boy with Hoka's dark, thoughtful eyes and Abigail's fiery red-tinted hair. They named him Alistair, for the grandfather he would never know. He was a child of two worlds, learning the stories of the Apache from his father and the letters of the English alphabet from his mother. A few years later, a daughter was born, a quiet, observant girl with a gentle spirit. They named her Nali, an Apache word for a resilient desert flower. The children were their future, a living testament to a love that had defied all odds. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, Abigail and Hoka would stand outside their home and watch the sunset paint the mesas in brilliant colors. She would lean her head against his shoulder, her hand resting in his, and feel a sense of peace that she had once thought impossible. The ghosts of the past were not gone. The memory of her father's sacrifice was a part of her, a source of both sorrow and strength. But the trauma of the past had faded, replaced by the deep, abiding love of her family and the profound beauty of her new home. They had found more than just survival in this wild land. They had found a life,